book that God has given us to live by, and the interpretation of that from the original writers to this day is something we need to be able to address. We need to be able to decipher and interpret that for our day.
Welcome to Crossing Culture. My name is Christopher Kroom. I'm your host as usual, and today we will have a conversation about the latest and greatest in the culture. Thank you so much for taking the time to take a look at this. It's your Friday afternoon, January 5th. It's no surprise to me. I knew I had to kind of jump in and have a conversation about this because it's going on in the culture, and to no surprise of really probably anybody at this point. Every time it seems, I'm no conspiratorial person, but it seems that every single time a big piece of news pops out or something of that nature, we get some kind of incident. And maybe it's coincidence. Possible. But, I get tired of saying that maybe it's a coincidence too. So, for Facebook, I have no official stance on this. I'm just saying it's weird. For everybody else who's not a robot or a Zuckerbot, something to keep an eye on in the days ahead. 2024 is an election year, so it could get pretty wild. I think the last time we had an election year out here, all hell broke loose. I don't know if you remember it, but protests in the streets, fiery but mostly peaceful. Yeah, I'm sure you do. Well, nevertheless, something tragic did occur yesterday, and what I'll do here is I'll put it up on the screen so you can take a look here and see. At least I think that's what I'm gonna do. Still working out the technology, y'all. So as you take a look here, man, I'm looking at the Fox News report, which I had to actually search for. Like I actually had to go into search on Fox to find this thing. It wasn't even in the headlines anymore. It wasn't even in like the little chyrons at the bottom, or the little pictures that they show you at the bottom where you can see like, oh, here's the stuff from the last couple of days or whatever. Wasn't even there. Normally you get something like this and it's plastered on the front page for at least a good 72 hours, and then they keep talking about all the information that they find and it comes out. This one got wiped out. I know CNN is used to doing that. Usually Fox News doesn't do that, but even in this instance, Fox News did it. So here's a fascinating little piece of information as you're taking a look and seeing what's going on here. Here's this headline: Iowa school shooting leaves 6th grader dead, 5 injured. When you look at the case and you look at the story of what's happening, it looks like it was a 17-year-old, by the name of Dylan Butler, who all his social media came down immediately after the incident, which I suppose it happens sometimes not. Depends on the situation, right? This suspected shooter, though, was a student of this small Perry, Iowa, I think that's the city, Perry, Iowa, town, and apparently the social media, if you can find it archived anywhere, it kind of shows like a picture of him like in a bathroom with a red duffel bag, saying "and now we wait" with some kind of like violent song playing. And you got the 17-year-old sitting in the bathroom plotting, apparently thinking, calculating what he's going to do, and then this incident takes place. Now, good on the cops, shout out to the police who managed to show up there in 7 minutes and shut this thing down before it got wild. And fortunately, it was so early in the morning coming back from a winter vacation that there weren't as many people there as perhaps could have been. But this is one of those things where you have to ask yourself, what's going on? Now, forgive me if I'm wrong, but the last few of these incidents, these type of school shootings and things that I've seen, it always gets discovered that, first it starts as, oh, it's white supremacist, starts as that. Then, it starts into its gun narrative. And then if we find out that they're part of some protected identity or some particular class of people, all of a sudden the story goes away, right? When you hit the intersectionality quota, the stories seem to go away. Odd. So, looking at this, and Fox News reports here, four of the surviving victims taken to the hospital, one in critical condition but not life threatening. And that's great. Luckily, like you said, very few students and faculty in the building, which contributed to a much better outcome, as good as you can have in a situation like that, sure. Apparently, not only was there firearms, but a rudimentary IED. Pretty wild. Now, upon finding out that this, when it was live, upon finding out that this was someone from one of those protected communities, the police actually stopped taking questions at that point. Once the identity was confirmed, the police no longer took questions from the press. That's not a good look. You know, we still don't have the manifesto from the Nashville shooter. But when I'm looking at this, I think we got to ask ourselves a much broader question, you know. They're here saying that, you know, our prayer is with the entire Perry community, and, you know, that's the right thing to say. Right? We're a Western culture, we're a Western Christian kind of culture, and it's the right thing to say. So, you know, I'm not going to judge her. I'm not going to judge the governor's, what's her name, Kim somebody. I'm not going to judge her, Kim Reynolds. There you go. I'm not going to judge her sincerity or anything, but I'm just saying that no matter what side of the spectrum you stand on, it seems like anyone in American politics, for the majority, with the exception of a few Minnesota Congress women and stuff like that, most people will, you know, say this: our prayers are with the entire community. We stand with you, so on and so forth. But we have to ask a very deep question. In a country where anyone will say our prayers are with you, where's God in all this? And you know, this is that moment where the non-believers will pop in and say, "Yeah, where's that God you believe in? What happened? Where is he? Why is this happening? If your God's so good." Well, here's the thing. I think there's a couple of things to cover there. First, it depends on if your definition of good is the same as my definition of good. Or should I say, God's definition of good. You know, no one enjoys death, and no one should take it lightly, but it's also part of a circle of what happens in life. Moreover, it's a part of what happens in a broken society that no longer values life. So, as much as death is a part of the circle of life, so to speak, so too has a disrespect or a negligence or a demeaning of life become part of our circle of life in Western Christianity. So it's something to think about. It's a question to ask, and you know, we have to wonder what's causing this. What's the role that's happening in which we all continue to see these things, and no one wants to address them. We can't get the media to address them. They put this in their back pocket, and that's that. Why? Well, like I said, you know, you got to hit that. You got to hit that particular group to get your stuff out of the news. So, you know, if you hit that intersectionality group, you can get your stuff out of the news. But more than that, I think we have to look deeper into the person, the soul. So these people, this particular person, seemed like they were troubled, seemed like they were disturbed, you know, dealing with a gender dysphoria. You know, DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, used to talk about this a lot differently. We used to talk about these as mental illnesses. We used to talk about this as, when we said dysphoria wasn't meant to be a softening of the word mental illness. It wasn't meant to be a way to cull back people's visceral reaction to hearing something like mental illness, so it's not as jarring, right? We gave it a softer sound. In fact, it's almost as if you could say the culture has marketed certain mental illnesses in a softer manner to make them not just more palatable, but more acceptable. Something to be revered, referenced. Why does the culture do that? The culture has to follow its natural pattern forward. So think about Romans chapter 1. Think about what Paul says in there when he talks about knowing them as God and they didn't worship him as God. So there, think about this as a fork in the road. Here you are and you're saying, this is God, and we can either worship him as God or not worship him as God. Now, if you worship him as God, think about the direction that you have to take. Think about the road that you have to travel on in terms of what it means to have reverence for human life, what it means to have respect for your brothers and sisters, what it means to do good in the world. And now think about if you take a couple of steps back to that fork in the road where you make that decision and you decide he's not God. A lot of people will start off with, yeah, we'll respect each other and we'll do these things, but under what pretense? Under what authority? They knew him as God, but they didn't worship him as God. So they didn't give him the reverence due to his works. And so the path they followed was one that was separated from God, but also by default separated from the connotation of a creator or an authority being over you. And when that happens, there's no foundation for what comes next. And so what comes next tends to be of convenience rather than of duty, rather than of definition. It tends to be something that becomes idealized by a group of people until it's acceptable in a broader expanse. Does that make sense? You have this limiting principle of God where you can say, here is a creator, so I recognize his authority over me. Thus, there's certain things I'm not going to do. Why? Because I would be overstepping my boundary. I would be overstepping my rights because I recognize who holds the rights and who is the boundary. On the other hand, I recognize that person as the creator, but I don't give them credit for everything they've done. I question some of it. And when you leave things open for question, well, you leave them open for change. And I'm not talking about the good kind of change, where we think through things and can correct ourselves, or logic brings us out of a certain way of thinking. That's a good change. But this is a more hostile change. In fact, this is a degeneration, a degradation of standard or principle or foundation, and now we've rejected the authority and the boundary that existed for us. And so take that path, travel down that road, and ask yourself, what's possible at the end of the road? When Jesus talks about there being a narrow and a wide way, you ever been in a narrow path? Like, you try to get through something and the walls are constricting, the space is constricting. There's not a lot of wiggle room, is there? So you tend to follow that path. You tend to follow that path. Now listen, I'm a pretty big guy, and so I don't like small spaces. All right, I don't know if I'm claustrophobic, but I certainly don't like small spaces. I Me and airplanes, I like terra firma, but when you get on an airplane and you get into those little, first you got to walk that little stupid aisle. Okay, we all know what we're talking about. We all know what I'm talking about. You walk that little stupid aisle. You can barely, if you're on a decent plane, you can at least walk with your 2 feet together. Otherwise, you got to put one in front of the other. Then you get to these seats where even though you and the person sitting with you in that row, where there's 3 chairs, agree to try and every time someone looks at that middle seat, you snarl at them so that you can keep the room. You're still essentially got one arm around that person in the third seat because it's so narrow. There's not a lot of wiggle room. You sit in that chair and maybe you don't need, listen, when I get on a flight, if I try to, I try not to even bother getting up. You know why? Because I'm not sure if I can. So I'm just like, let me save that effort for the moment when the flight's over. Make sense? That's how I fly. When I fly, I don't like to fly. It's like, but that's kind of the same thought. There's not a lot of wiggle room. So the narrowness keeps you from going to one side or the other. Now, on the other hand, you ever gotten on a highway dark at night and in a city you're not, or a part of town you're not like super familiar with? You start driving and you just see wide road, highways, expanse, and there's like nobody out. And you start, you're listening to your music, you're driving down a side street because there's construction in one, and you're going down, the music's on, and you're so into your music and you're distracted because, no one's out. Your favorite jam's on. And the next thing you know, you're like, wait a minute, I missed my exit. Whoops. Example of the narrow road, example of the wide road, right? The broad road, right? It's easier to make a mistake. You get comfortable. There's a lot of elbow room. You get used to the elbow room. Next thing you know, you missed your exit and you're in the next city trying to bum gas from somewhere, like, not cool. It's like, so that's kind of what happens in a culture. You get to a point in a culture where the expanse gets so wide, the comfort sets in so deep that the atrocity, the degeneration really could just go anywhere. You could end up anywhere. You'll most certainly hit the wrong exit. Hope you don't run out of gas in the wrong part of town. So here we are back at this story, and we're asking ourselves, how does this happen in a culture? Well, it happens when the wheels slowly come off. When you're on that road and you're listening to those comforting tunes, it's a wide road, no one's telling you that the problem or potential problem ahead of you exists. You're told all is well and the music keeps you moving. And so you just persist until you're lost or whatever else. It's the same thing with these things in mental illnesses. People get told for so long that they're okay. People get told for so long that it's not a problem with them, it's a problem with us. Yeah, sometimes it is a problem with us, but sometimes it's a problem with someone else. And we've got to, be able to acknowledge that. It's like, so there gets to be a point where we've got to ask ourselves, like, okay, have we driven this so far down a broad road, a broad path, that we're comfortable with what we see? We're comfortable with letting people remain ill and sick and not addressing that. Yeah, it's a spiritual need, but there's mental needs too. There's a little bit of both. We've let both go by the wayside. And because we're so spiritually sick, we don't have the temerity to call out the cultural sickness. So I know you're sitting back and you're going, absolutely, you're right. I know you are. I know you agree with me. Okay? I know it. Or else you wouldn't have watched this long. Because no one watches me this long. But the real question is, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do? Well, let me give you a couple of suggestions, maybe one or two, right? Depending on the direction you want to take. Some people are more hard nosed. They'll go out there and yell it on the streets that, you're a wreck, you need this, you got to do that. That's not particularly my style. My style, I like to sit back and ask the questions that drive you back to the core of the issue. Why is a very powerful question. Why do we put up with this? Because that's who they are, but why do we assume that's who they are? Why can't it be anything other than that? It's like, because you're denying them as a person. Why? Is gender personhood? Like, is that what you're saying? It's like, because when you get into that kind of discussion, it's a whole different ballpark now. So what you're saying is that I deny you as a person if I deny the gender you choose. I thought that there was more depth to life than a penis or a vagina. And sorry if that's jarring or if the kids are watching, but I think that there's more to life than, you know, male, female, genitalia, what junk you got between your legs. Like, there's more to life than that. And so now, my question back is, why are you degenerating life down to your genitals? You're so much more. Your physicality, your mentality, your capability, it all breeds into a person. And so, if you want to talk about rejecting someone's personhood, it's not me who does it, it's you. Because you reject the differences and you make it all to seem like one thing. And that's what happens when you're on a broad road. You get comfortable. Everything starts to blend together. You're listening to the music, the wind's hitting your hair, the lights are out there, there's a sweet sound, it's a beautiful night, and the next thing you know, you're lost. You've lost your way. And that's what happened here. So as sad as this is today, what I want you to take away from what's happening here is that beyond our prayers being an entire community is that we've got to revitalize our minds. We've got to prepare ourselves to have this kind of conversation in the culture. We've got to be able to go back to the culture and say, listen, I understand what you're saying, but tell me why. Tell me more, because I don't think this is right. And we've got to evaluate this situation to determine where we go from here. You can complain about guns all you want to, but as long as there are people like this that don't get the help they need, that don't get a cold dose of reality when it's necessary, nothing changes. It's all a facade, it's all a cover up for the moral and spiritual sickness that we see. Listen, I'll have more on this at another time maybe, or more on other things of the culture, but I didn't prepare a script or bullet points or anything like that today. Just off the cuff on this topic that came out because I was upset that it came out and then went away. And so I wanted to take some time to address it for the archives, but thanks for watching. Share the video. It's Crossing Culture. You can find me on YouTube at The Crossing Culture. Should be on Rumble, CNC PhD, or The Crossing Culture. Twitter, CNC PhD. Obviously, Facebook, and you can find us at crossingculture.org. That is cross and culture, all one word, .org. Crossing Culture is here for, obviously, the church and the culture. We're here, me and my business partner are here to talk doctrine and theology, which is really his thing, almost a non-cultural theologian, and And me, I'm here to talk about the culture from a theological perspective, a Christian perspective, a practical perspective, a philosophical perspective. In addition to that, we do business and church consulting as well. Do you want to understand how to build leaders, how to create a longevity to your church? Do you want to understand what it means to develop the future leaders? Because that's what we're talking about today. If you don't know what you're going to be doing with these kind of stories that come out today, then how is anyone else going to know what they're doing? How are you going to train the next generation to be prepared to do that? How do you put in place your legacy for the longevity of your church and for that community? Because you know what happens over time? Those churches crust and corrupt and corrode, and there's nothing there for that community anymore except for an old pretty building. So you need to start thinking about your contingency plan for your leadership, and Cross and Culture can help you with that. Again, check us out, crossandculture.org. That is crossandculture, one word.org. Like and subscribe to anything on social media. If you want to get a hold of us, you can email me at chris@crossandculture.org, or you can follow up on the Facebook website, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Any other thing that or we can do for you that comes up, we'll think of. We'll post a video on it. Other than that, thanks for taking the time, and I hope that you enjoy your weekend. All right? Stay out of trouble.
Book that God has given us to live by, and the interpretation of that from the original writers to this day is something we need to be able to address. We need to be able to decipher and interpret that for our day.